It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The engagement party was perfect, everything I had dreamed of. The ballroom was filled with New York's elite, the crystal chandeliers casting a soft glow over the crowd. I was surrounded by friends, family, and the man I loved more than anything, Daniel. A billionaire? Yes. But more than that, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. Everything was perfect, until it wasn't. I was laughing with a friend when I noticed Daniel across the room, standing with my sister, Emily. They were smiling, whispering. At first, I thought nothing of it. Why would I? Emily had always been a little envious of my life, but I never thought she'd do anything to hurt me. I trusted her. I trusted both of them. And then Emily stood up. She tapped her glass, the sound ringing through the room, cutting through the laughter and chatter. "I have something to announce," she said, her voice trembling just enough to make it sound genuine. I smiled, expecting her to share some exciting news about her life, but instead, she dropped a bomb that shattered mine. "I'm pregnant, and it's Daniel's baby." The room fell into a stunned silence. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I searched Daniel's face for denial, for anything that would make sense of this madness, but all I saw was guilt. In that moment, I realized that my sister had destroyed my life in the most unimaginable way. Looking back, my life with Daniel seemed like a dream. We met at one of those high society events in Manhattan, the kind where the champagne flows endlessly and everyone wears designer gowns and tailored suits. I didn't expect much from the evening, just another night of networking and small talk. But then I saw him, Daniel, tall, handsome, and commanding the room without even trying. He was talking business with a few CEOs, but when our eyes met from across the room, it was like the world stopped for a second. He excused himself from his conversation and walked straight toward me. I still remember the thrill of that moment, the way my heart raced as he introduced himself with that charming smile of his. From that night, everything moved fast. Daniel swept me off my feet in a way I never expected. Our first date was dinner at a Michelin star restaurant, followed by a helicopter ride over the city. I was stunned, not just by the luxury, but by him. He wasn't like the other men in his world, whose only focus was their wealth. Daniel was kind, thoughtful, and surprisingly down to earth. I fell for him, really fell for him. His money and power? That was just background noise. What mattered to me was the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel like the most important person in the room. Of course, my family was thrilled. Emily, my younger sister, was especially excited for me. She'd always looked up to me, and I was happy to share my good fortune with her. Daniel was great with her too. He treated her like family from the start, always making sure she felt included when we went to dinners or took trips together. But as the months passed and my relationship with Daniel deepened, I started noticing little things, subtle changes in Emily. At first, it was small, harmless, I thought. She'd make offhand comments about how lucky I was, how perfect my life seemed. She'd joke about how she couldn't wait to find her own Daniel. I laughed it off, not realizing how much weight those words carried for her. When Daniel proposed, Emily was the first person I called. She screamed with excitement, telling me how much I deserved it, how happy she was for me. But when I saw her in person later that week, I noticed something else. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was fleeting, almost forced. I brushed it off, convincing myself that I was overthinking. She was my sister, my best friend. She could never be anything but happy for me, right? In the months leading up to the engagement party, the cracks in our relationship became harder to ignore. Emily started spending more time with Daniel, under the guise of helping with the party planning. She insisted it was for me, that she wanted everything to be perfect, but there was something off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Sometimes I'd catch them sharing a laugh or a private conversation, but I told myself it was nothing. Daniel was practically family to her by now, and I trusted both of them completely. I should have seen it. The way Emily's compliments turned into quiet envy. The way her excitement for me slowly shifted into something darker. But I was too caught up in my own happiness, in the whirlwind of planning a wedding with the man I loved, to notice what was happening right in front of me. Looking back now, I see all the signs. I see the moments I should have questioned, the times I should have asked more from both of them. But I didn't. I was too wrapped up in my perfect life, too naive to think that my own sister could ever betray me in the most unforgivable way. The night was supposed to be about us. The rooftop glittered with fairy lights, and the backdrop of the New York City skyline created the perfect, magical setting. I was surrounded by friends, family, and the most powerful people in the city, all gathered to celebrate my engagement to Daniel, the man I thought I'd spend my life with. Emily had been at my side all night, offering her usual bubbly support, her arm hooked through mine as we welcomed the guests. I had no reason to suspect a thing, no reason to believe that behind her bright smile was the dagger she was about to drive into my back. After hours of champagne and endless congratulations, Emily stood up, her glass raised. I thought she was going to give a toast to us, her sister and soon-to-be brother-in-law. I smiled, anticipating some funny anecdote from our childhood, something light and joyous. But then, her voice wavered, and she glanced nervously at Daniel. "I have an announcement to make," Emily said, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. She lowered her glass and placed her hand on her stomach in a way that made my heart drop, even before the words left her mouth. "I'm pregnant, and it's Daniel's baby." For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just a deafening silence as the world around me came crashing down. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses, all of it faded into the background. I felt like I was underwater, the words echoing in my head. Pregnant? Daniel's baby? This had to be some kind of cruel joke. I turned to Daniel, expecting him to laugh, to deny it, to tell me that Emily was out of her mind. But he didn't. He just stood there, pale, frozen, his eyes filled with guilt. And that's when I knew. It wasn't a joke, it was the truth. My stomach twisted, and my world tilted, like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I felt everyone's eyes on me, their whispers and gasps like knives in my back. "Is this true?" I demanded, my voice cracking with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Tell me she's lying." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. He couldn't even look at me. He just stared at the ground, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Say something," I shouted, my voice cutting through the silence of the rooftop. I could feel my chest tightening, the panic setting in. Finally, he stammered, It was a mistake. It was only once. Emily, she..." My head swam as he struggled to find the words, his voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. But all I could hear was the betrayal in his voice. My fiancé, my sister, the two people I trusted most in the world, had destroyed me in one single moment. As if on cue, Emily's face crumpled into a mask of devastation. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whimpered, casting her eyes downward, playing the role of the victim perfectly. "I didn't know what to do. I didn't want this. I'm so embarrassed. I never wanted to hurt you." Her voice was soft and pitiful, and I could feel the sympathy of the crowd shifting toward her, even though she was the one who had shattered my life. People murmured around me, their pitying eyes now turned toward Emily, as though she were the one suffering, not me, the woman whose life had just been torn apart. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at her for playing the victim, for turning the situation to her advantage, even as she stole everything from me. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt trapped, suffocating in a crowd of people who were watching my world collapse, but couldn't see that I was the one left standing in the ruins. I had never felt so alone, so humiliated. And as I stood there, frozen, watching Emily cradle her stomach with one hand and wipe her tears with the other, I realized that my life, the life I thought I had, was over. Everything I knew, everything I trusted, had crumbled in front of me. After the engagement party, everything that had once made sense in my life crumbled around me. I spent days holed up in the luxury apartment Daniel and I had shared in Manhattan, unable to function, unable to comprehend the depth of the betrayal. The beautiful space that had once been my sanctuary now felt suffocating. Every corner, every piece of furniture, a reminder of the life I had thought we were building together. A life that, in the blink of an eye, was destroyed. I couldn't stop replaying the events of that night. Emily's voice, her announcement, the pitiful way she played the victim. And Daniel, silent, guilty, weak. He didn't defend me, he didn't deny her claims. He just stood there, watching as my world fell apart. I was angry, but more than that, I was heartbroken. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen what was happening right in front of me? I started to question everything, my relationship with Daniel, my bond with Emily. I had trusted them both with my heart, with my life, and they had shattered it. Had I ever truly known either of them, or had I just been fooling myself? For days, I didn't leave the apartment. The vibrant city outside the windows felt distant, as if it belonged to another world. My phone buzzed constantly, but I ignored it. Calls, messages, family, friends, even Daniel. I couldn't face any of them. What would I even say? That I had been betrayed by the two people I loved most in the world? That my sister was pregnant with my fiancé's child? Emily wasted no time, though. While I hid in my grief, she was out there, spinning her story to anyone who would listen. By the time I finally picked up my phone, the narrative had already shifted. Emily had told everyone how sorry she was, how this situation had devastated her, how she never wanted any of this to happen. She painted herself as the helpless victim, and somehow people believed her. My own family, my own blood, started looking at me as if I was the unreasonable one. Like somehow I should have been more understanding, more forgiving. After all, Emily was pregnant. Shouldn't I be more compassionate? Shouldn't I be trying to find a way to fix this instead of falling apart? The judgment weighed on me like a heavy fog. Daniel's friends, who had once welcomed me with open arms, now kept their distance, as if I was some kind of ticking time bomb they didn't want to be associated with. Even mutual acquaintances seemed to turn their backs. It was as if I had become the villain in my own story. And Daniel? He tried to reach out. He called, texted, even came by the apartment once, but I couldn't bring myself to face him. He left me a voicemail, stumbling over his words, trying to explain. He said he regretted everything. He said he felt trapped by Emily's pregnancy, but still cared for me. Cared for me? Cared for me? The words made me sick. If he had truly cared, he wouldn't have betrayed me in the first place. His regret meant nothing. His guilt didn't change what had happened. I had to get out of that apartment. Every inch of it reminded me of him, of them. So I packed my things and left. The boxes felt like anchors, each one heavier than the last as I filled them with the remnants of a life I no longer recognized. The apartment that had once felt like home now felt foreign, tainted by lies and deceit. I moved into a smaller place, just a few blocks away. It wasn't as luxurious, but it was mine, a fresh start. Or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about how they had destroyed my life. And not just Emily and Daniel, the people around me, the ones who should have supported me, who should have stood by me. They had all turned their backs, blinded by Emily's manipulation and Daniel's money. I realized, sitting alone in my new, unfamiliar apartment, that I couldn't let this be the end. I couldn't let them win. Emily had taken everything from me, and Daniel had let her. But I wasn't going to sit back and watch them destroy me. If they thought I was going to just disappear quietly, they were wrong. I started thinking, plotting really. I didn't know how, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Emily wanted to play the innocent victim, and Daniel wanted to pretend like he was trapped in some situation beyond his control. Fine, let them. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I had lost my relationship, my trust, and my family. But I still had my dignity, and I was going to make sure they never forgot that. I had always known something was off. After everything that had happened, Emily's announcement at the engagement party, Daniel's guilty silence, it didn't sit right with me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there were gaps in Emily's story. The timeline didn't add up. There were too many loose ends. I couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was hiding something, and I was determined to find out what it was. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I needed the truth, and I knew Emily wouldn't give it to me willingly. I gave the investigator everything I knew, and I waited. It took a few days, but when the phone call finally came, I knew my instincts had been right all along. Emily had never been pregnant. Not once, not ever. It was all a lie, a twisted, manipulative scheme to steal Daniel from me. The investigator had uncovered medical records showing Emily had never been to any doctor appointments, no prenatal care, nothing. She'd faked the whole thing. My head swam with anger and disbelief. I should have been shocked, but really, I wasn't. This was who Emily was, who she had always been, jealous, desperate, willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way, even me, her own sister. Armed with the truth, I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was time for a confrontation. I invited Daniel to my apartment that evening. He walked in, looking nervous, clearly sensing that something was wrong. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice unsure. I didn't waste time. I placed the folder on the table between us, watching his eyes flicker to it. "It's about Emily, and the baby." His face paled immediately, and he took a step back. "What do you mean?" he stammered, though his voice carried a heavy weight of guilt. "Read it," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Read it, and you'll understand everything." Daniel hesitated before reaching for the folder, his hands trembling as he opened it. I watched him scan the documents, his expression changing from confusion to disbelief to horror. "This can't be true," he muttered, flipping through the pages. "She said she was pregnant." "She lied," I replied coldly, the satisfaction building inside me as I watched the realization dawn on his face. "There was never a baby, Daniel. Emily made the whole thing up. She manipulated you. She manipulated all of us." He dropped the folder onto the table, his hands covering his face as he slumped into the chair. "I can't believe this. How could she? How could I have fallen for this?" I crossed my arms, the anger rising in me again. "Because you wanted to believe her. You chose her over me. You let her destroy us." He shook his head, his voice breaking. I didn't know she was lying. I thought she was telling the truth." I stood there, silent, letting his words sink in. But the truth was, I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. He had made his choice when he believed Emily without question, when he let her lies come between us. Now he was facing the consequences, but it wasn't over yet. I had called Emily too. I wanted her to see the destruction she had caused. I wanted her to face the truth. When she arrived, I could see the smugness still lingering in her expression. She thought she had won, but the moment she stepped inside and saw the open folder on the table, her face fell. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaky. I stepped forward, my eyes locked on hers. "The truth is out, Emily. You've been lying from the start. There was no baby. You faked the whole thing." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. "That's not true," she shouted, trying to regain control. I lost the baby. It was a miscarriage." I shook my head, stepping closer, refusing to let her lies twist the truth any longer. "Stop. Just stop. I've seen the records. You were never pregnant, and we both know it." Emily's facade crumbled in an instant. Her shoulders slumped, and her eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I just wanted what you had." Her confession poured out in broken pieces. "I've always been jealous of you," she said, her voice shaking. "You always had everything. Daniel, the perfect life. I was tired of being in your shadow. I thought if I had him, if I had a baby, I could finally have the life I deserved." I stood there, listening to her pathetic excuses, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. She had destroyed my relationship, torn apart our family, all because of her jealousy and selfishness. And now, her lies were laid bare for everyone to see. Daniel, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "Emily, how could you do this?" His voice was filled with disgust, his hands trembling as he looked at her. "You lied to everyone. You ruined everything." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she fell to her knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to be happy." I stared at her, feeling no pity, no remorse. "You didn't just want to be happy. You wanted to take everything from me." There was nothing left to say. Emily had dug her own grave, and I wasn't going to pull her out of it. Daniel looked at me, his face full of regret and horror, but I didn't care anymore. The damage was done. As I stood there, watching them both fall apart, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Emily's lies had crumbled, and I was free from her web of manipulation. Finally, I could walk away, and this time, I wasn't looking back. The days after the big reveal were like watching the aftermath of a natural disaster. Everything and everyone left in pieces. Emily's lie, once carefully constructed, had imploded in spectacular fashion, tearing apart the fragile threads of our family. What was once a close-knit, loving family unit became a battlefield of whispered conversations, pointed fingers, and shattered trust. Emily had gone from being the adored, youngest sister to a pariah. The same people who had once doted on her and believed her every word now looked at her with disdain. She tried to explain herself, to justify her actions, but no one was listening anymore. My parents, our relatives, even her friends, everyone had turned their backs on her. And I didn't feel sorry for her, not anymore. She tried to apologize, of course. She showed up at my apartment one morning, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her hands trembling as she knocked on my door. "Please," she said, her voice breaking as soon as I opened the door. "Please, just hear me out." For a second, I felt something stir inside me, a flicker of the sisterly bond we had shared for so many years. But it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by the memory of the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. Emily had taken everything from me: my fiancé, my family's trust, and even my sense of security. I couldn't go back. "I'm sorry, Emily," I said, my voice cold but steady. "But I don't care anymore. You made your choices, now you have to live with them." Her face crumpled in response, but I didn't let it get to me. I shut the door on her, and with it, I shut out the part of my life that had once been wrapped up in her lies. Daniel wasn't any better. After everything that had happened, he still had the nerve to try and win me back. He sent flowers, called constantly, left long, guilt-ridden voicemails trying to explain himself. In his mind, he was the victim too, manipulated by Emily's lies, caught in a situation he claimed he had no control over. But I wasn't buying it. One night I finally picked up when he called. His voice was soft, pleading, almost desperate. "I was wrong," he said. "I was wrong to believe her. You have to understand. I thought—" "You thought what?" I snapped, cutting him off. "That I'd be okay with you betraying me? That I'd understand because you were trapped?" The anger that I'd been holding in for weeks came rushing out. "You chose her, Daniel. You believed her lies without even questioning them. You didn't defend me. You didn't protect us." He was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was filled with regret. "I made a mistake. I know that now. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me." But it was too late. I had spent enough time living in the shadow of other people's lies. I wasn't going to go back to that. I deserve better than you, I said, my voice firm. And I won't spend another second of my life with someone who didn't see my worth when it mattered. The line went quiet, and I could feel the weight of my words settling between us. He tried to say something else, but I hung up before he could finish. Word spread quickly. In the circles Daniel moved in, high society, the elite, there was no room for scandal. His name became the subject of gossip, whispered conversations at fancy dinner parties. The man who had once seemed untouchable now had a tarnished reputation. People didn't trust him the way they once had. His business deals were questioned, his integrity doubted. And for someone like Daniel, that was the ultimate punishment. As for Emily, she was left with nothing. No relationship, no family support, and no friends willing to stand by her. She was on her own, shunned by the very people who had once adored her. In the end, all her manipulation had left her empty-handed, isolated, and utterly alone. I, on the other hand, was finally free. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't tied down by someone else's lies, someone else's drama. I had spent so long trying to navigate the toxic relationships that had dominated my life, my toxic bond with Emily, my dependence on Daniel's love. But now, I was free of all of it. Liberation was a strange feeling. It wasn't the triumphant movie-like moment I thought it would be. It was quieter, more peaceful. There was no rush of victory, no loud celebration. Just me, standing in the middle of my life, realizing that I was finally in control of my own happiness. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. In the quiet of my apartment, after all the chaos had died down, I found myself alone with my thoughts. Emily's lies had unraveled. Daniel was out of my life. And yet, the anger still lingered. It was as if the betrayal had seeped into every part of me, and I couldn't escape it. The thought of forgiveness seemed impossible. How could I ever forgive someone who had torn my life apart so ruthlessly? But then, the alternative, the idea of holding on to that anger, felt just as toxic. I had spent weeks imagining all the ways I could make Emily suffer, make her feel what I felt. I had dreamed of revenge, of watching her crumble under the weight of her own deception, and in some ways, I had gotten that. Emily had been shunned by our family, abandoned by her friends. She had lost everything, and I had watched it happen with cold satisfaction. But now that the dust had settled, I realized that my anger wasn't fading. It was festering, and I was carrying it with me like a weight I didn't need. Did I want to spend the rest of my life defined by the pain she had caused me? By the betrayal that had consumed me? The answer was no. Revenge had its moment. It gave me a sense of justice, a fleeting satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't bringing me the peace I had hoped it would. If anything, it was trapping me in the past, tethering me to the very people I wanted to leave behind. I thought about Emily. I thought about how much I had loved her, how close we had once been, and then I thought about how much she had destroyed in her desperate attempt to have what I had. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I also couldn't let her actions define my future. The person I wanted to become, the person I deserved to be, wasn't someone who carried bitterness and hatred like a badge of honor. I had a choice. I could let my anger keep festering, or I could let it go. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to move on. As for Daniel, there was nothing left to say. He had shown me who he was the moment he believed Emily's lies without a second thought. Whatever guilt he felt now, whatever regret was eating him up, it wasn't my burden to carry. He was part of my past, just like Emily, and that's where I intended to leave him. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my chest for the first time in weeks. This wasn't about forgiving Emily, or about getting revenge on Daniel. This was about me, about my life, about taking back control and walking away from the wreckage they had left behind. With one last glance out of the window, I stepped into my new life, stronger, more independent, and no longer defined by the betrayal of others. Months passed, and life slowly began to fall back into place. After everything that had happened, I was finally focused on myself, on my own career, my own happiness. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I felt lighter. The bitterness that had once consumed me was fading, replaced by a calm sense of purpose. My business was thriving, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free from Emily, free from Daniel, free from the weight of betrayal. I had rebuilt my life, brick by brick, and I was proud of it. One afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing plans for a new project, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me stop and open it. "I've changed. I miss you. Can we talk?" It was Emily. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling an odd mix of emotions. Part of me had expected this. After all, Emily had always tried to wriggle her way back into my life when things didn't go her way. But another part of me wondered if, just maybe, she had truly changed. Maybe the months of isolation had forced her to reflect, to grow. People could change, couldn't they? Before I could respond, another message popped up, this time from an old friend I hadn't heard from in a while. "Thought you should know, Emily's back to her old tricks. She's been seeing a guy, same pattern. Be careful." My heart sank. The air in the room seemed to shift as I read the message again, making sure I had seen it right. It was like déjà vu. Here she was, once again, playing her games, manipulating her way into another man's life. Another wealthy man, no doubt. Nothing had changed. I set my phone down, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on me. I had two choices. I could expose her, just as I had done before. I could warn this man, or his family, or whoever it was that Emily was trying to deceive this time. It would be so easy, so satisfying to bring her down again. But would it really change anything? Or I could walk away. I had spent so much of my life entangled in Emily's web of lies, caught up in her drama. I had already freed myself once. Did I really want to be pulled back in? The silence in the room was thick as I weighed my options. Exposing her again might feel good in the moment, but it would mean getting dragged back into the mess I had worked so hard to leave behind. I had my own life now, my own peace. I had finally found the happiness I had been searching for. As I sat there, I realized that I wasn't responsible for Emily anymore. Her choices were her own, and so were the consequences. I picked up my phone and typed a single word in response to Emily's message: "No." Then I put the phone away, stood up, and walked out of the office, leaving the past behind me once and for all.